Hello, and welcome to the Three Links Oddcast, your podcast for all things having to do with Odd Fellowship. And now, here are your hosts. Welcome, everyone, to the Three Links Oddcast. I'm one of your hosts, Toby Hansen.
I'm Ainsley Heilich, and tonight we are joined by Wayne Gertz.
Hello, all.
Hello, Brother Wayne. I should mention that Sergio is stuck at work this evening. They're having some sort of a crisis there, and being the good employee that he is helping out at work, and hopefully he'll be able to get home and jump in on this episode, which is brought to you by our wonderful sponsors at Pig and a Pug Bath Stuff. If you like bath stuff, they make it, and it's really, really good. They're also extending their special deal for Oddfellows podcast listeners for another episode. So if you haven't got your bath supplies yet, be sure and look up Pig and a Pug Bath Stuff. They are available on Facebook and on Etsy. And just use the code THANKYOU24. That's thank you and the number 24 at checkout for a 24% discount on all of their wonderful handmade bath products. So hello, everyone. We are happy to be here. We're talking about communication on this episode. And I'm going to turn it over to Brother Ainsley here and our special guest, Brother Wayne from Ontario. Ainsley?
All right. We were wanting to do an episode that discussed communications within the Oddfellows. And being that I am on the Sovereign Grand Lodge Communications Committee, I had the brilliant idea to bring in another member of that committee to join us to talk about communications. I thought Wayne would be a great person to have on since he has been on the committee for a while and he's been an Oddfellow far longer than I. And I oftentimes look to his expertise on how to handle matters of communication online and off. If you want to give us a little bit of your background, Wayne, and a little bit of your Oddfellow career, and then we'll get into the interview.
Sure, Ainsley. I have been an Oddfellow for over 40 years. And right from the onset, I was always interested in how things work and how I could learn more and so on and so forth. And just for an interesting little part is I used to be very shy and was afraid to talk. And lo and behold, I joined Oddfellows and I stood up one day and I said something. And nobody shot me. I stayed alive. And actually people seemed to appreciate what I said. And of course, now you can't shut me up.
Oh, we know. We've seen you at Sovereign Grand Lodge.
And but anyhow, along the way, I've learned a lot of things. I've learned from a lot of good people, and I've kept interest in all these things. And so when I had the time, I eventually worked myself up the ladder, and I was Grand Master in Ontario in 2012. And currently, I'm the Grand Scribe of the Grand Cabinet in Ontario, as well as a Grand Representative. Since I'm a Grand Representative, somebody tagged me and said, hey, I think you might be able to help out on the Communications Committee. And so here I am, 3 years later, still on the committee. And as Ainsley said, we work together. He does a lot of the web-based stuff, and I kind of help out a little bit with Facebook. And of course, one of the mandates of the Communications Committee is that we have to take a look at what all the Oddfellows are posting here, there, and everywhere. Sort of be an overseer to make sure that things that are being posted are for the good of the order. And if they're not quite for the good of the order, we're supposed to see if we can help correct some of their ways so that most of the stuff is positive. We certainly allow a discussion to go on that may be, somewhat offbeat, but as long as it stays positive, we can have good questions back and forth on different things. So the only thing is we have to be a bit careful when somebody doesn't want to play ball, in that, you, as an overseer, you can cause more havoc as well. So it's one of those things where it's kind of touchy feeling and getting to know the people that you're dealing with. And I think we've got to know a few of the characters around.
There's definitely a lot of characters in Odd Fellowship, and especially when you get people online and they can get behind a keyboard and be a little bit more libertine with their thoughts and feelings, whereas in person it's a little bit maybe more difficult to be quite as abrasive. Politeness tends to be easier in person instead of behind a keyboard. So you've been on the committee. This is your third year then?
Yeah, I've been on. I've finished 3 years.
Okay.
What I have found interesting a lot of times is I'll sit back and I'll watch, and some other Oddfellow members will actually take people to task on what they put on Facebook. And so a lot of times we sit back, we watch, and if something gets too bad, we sort of take a little action. But so far it's been pretty good, I think.
Yeah, I think so too. Of course, when we do have a problem, you and I tend to communicate on the messenger about what to do and deal with it. It's not like we're ruling, online communications with Oddfellows with an iron fist. We're trying to be very, very thoughtful with what we're, moderating, instead of just, clear cutting, deleting, and or censoring even. If somebody's saying something that might be a little testy, if it's about dues or, things like that. So since, I'm sorry.
I wonder, Ainsley, if we just, while we're talking about it, should bring in the names of the other members. There is a fellow by the name of Ace Adams, and he is in Minnesota, so he also helps us with it. Then we have Mel
Astrahan.
He's a past Grand Master from California. And then we have Taka, which is Brother Shiroma from Hawaii. So we cover a fairly large span of the different time zones, so we can sort of all take a look at it. But usually Ainsley stays up late and catches a lot of them, and I get up earlier, I catch some of them. But the other guys are working with us, and they're doing their thing as well.
And I think also it should be noted that on what our committee entails, I don't know the history or how long the communications committee's been around or what the original purpose of it was. But as of right now, as it is in the code, what we cover is the website, the database, and the social media, and any emails that come through from the website and any of the messages that come through the social media. So Wayne handles the Facebook end of the messages mostly, and then I'll handle the email messages, and then I don't get a ton of messages on the Instagram, but I'll answer those too, obviously. But I try to do mostly a lot of like front end chatting on Instagram, and of course the many various groups that are underneath the umbrella of the page that we are in charge of as well. We're the Independent Order of Oddfellows community group, where we try to direct anybody who is a member or is interested in a member to go there. And, we'll get a lot of those spammy Illuminati kind of. Luckily, we have a really good kind of group of people who know to just hit that report button. And so we could just delete it right away. So we have a good group of people who will report things if it's, like a spammy thing, or if it's inappropriate, or if it's not in the good of the order. So that way we could take it down. So we don't have to sit and babysit all day and watch it like we're, the Oddfellow online Gestapo or anything crazy like that. Because some people like to think we're that, but we're really not. We're just, in between what we're doing during our days. Like I work full time, I own a business, and Wayne is busy with tons of stuff. I know you're traveling a lot, so it's not like we're just sitting like on a laptop monitoring everything that's happening online at all times. So, we try to, like, I check in a couple times a day and I do some postings, and Wayne checks the messages and we answer, and it's, yeah. But I think for a volunteer run thing, we stay really on top of it, and we post a lot of content as well, which I think if you look at, voluntary positions, we do a lot, considering, what we're in charge of. It's very important.
Now, that brings up a good question from me. You mentioned a couple areas of responsibility that the Communications Committee has. One of them is the Sovereign Grand Lodge website. One of them is Facebook. One of them is Instagram. Mm-hmm. So could you maybe break down your responsibilities and how you run each one of those aspects of communication?
We have discussed that, and I think basically, like, unfortunately, like, the other members of the committee might not be quite as active online as we are. So they're kind of more in the support role. And then since Wayne has really, been like, yeah, I'm going to take care of these messages on the Facebook. I was like, okay, awesome. So then, like, Wayne really has stepped up in the last couple of years and really helped out with a lot of that overburden. And for me, like, we really are, I mean, I feel like the Communications Committee is the front line of people's introduction to Odd Fellowship. So we have to make sure we are putting our best face forward and putting the best posts forward of what would make people be interested in Odd Fellowship. So, I mean, like, Wayne posts stuff, like he posted that one post today that had moved him enough that he thought it was important enough to bring this conversation to, on that page to be had, and to have these conversation starters, basically. And I think it's really good that we have this platform to be able to get the membership kind of discussing, and it helps us, kind of address some issues.
So if I may just add a little bit to this, Toby,
yeah,
as to your question, is that originally the Communications Committee sort of was started in the late 90s, and that's when they started to develop the web presence. So it moved from one little group of people to the next little group of people, and they were all pretty good at doing stuff on the web, and so things were developed. So then we had the previous to the current, which is the IOOF.org website, of which Steve Rutten was the webmaster. And so then along the way, the powers that be decided that we should have a more modern website built on the WordPress platform. And so this is where Ainsley stepped up to the plate. And he spent a lot of time building that web platform on WordPress. And it looks very nice. It has a lot of good features in it. So anyways, we still have parts of the old website attached to it, which gives us access to the databases, for example, the jurisdictional information, et cetera. And so that has been a very good marriage. Of course, along comes the social media platforms, which came later. And so now, the order realized we need to have a presence in the social media. And so we got into that a while ago. There were other people involved, including Ainsley. I came on board quite a bit later, but it was started somewhere maybe about 2010 or so, where the social media became involved. And it's important because one of the things that I have found is we really reach a lot of strangers who are interested. We reach a lot of young people who are very interested. So we're communicating with the world, and there is a very few restricted ones. For example, the Independent Order of Oddfellows Facebook page, you have to be a member in order to be able to join. Mm-hmm. You can read, but you cannot post, etc. Then, of course, there's been some other ones created. For example, the Independent Order of Oddfellows community page, which we pretty much let anybody join into. right?
Mhm.
So they can communicate to us easily, we can communicate to them. Then we have some specialized pages, which mainly Ainsley has built, like the Odd Fellow artist, and he's built a web page strictly for the sale of Sovereign Grand Lodge produced or approved items for sale so that we can sell them on to other lodges as opposed to them going out to the world wide, so they are retained. So those are all communication issues that really we have, and mainly was the big driver for that, but we have really worked at in the last 3 years at the very least. And in my opinion, we're successfully communicating with the world.
Now that brings up another question. You mentioned that with Facebook and the other social media platforms, we are communicating with a lot of younger people. What do you think that means, and what kind of communications are we having? And Ainsley, I know that you answer a lot of the email inquiries that come into the website, so this is an area where I know you've definitely got some information to share.
So definitely, I get probably, I would say anywhere between 10 to 15 emails a week through the website, sometimes up to 20. They generally will fall into a number, like a small group of categories, which I have pre-typed out stock responses that I can then customize the sandwich meat of. Um, Genealogy questions are a big one. So I have a stock response for that. Another one that I get a lot of are rental inquiries. And because a lot of individual lodges will have a Google listing, but the contact will be our website. So then I have to then give them the stock email. What lodge are you looking to rent so I could get you the contact info? So then I have to go from there to get the, hopefully I can find a phone number. And then after that, it's people inquiring about joining the Odd Fellows, or they found an item and they're curious about learning more about it. And what I try to do is I try to get them as best information as I can get them. If they're looking for a lodge, if I know the actual lodge information, I give that to them. If not, I give them the Grand Secretary information for that jurisdiction, which could be a sticky moment, and we'll touch on that later, because that'll be, that's a whole topic of lack of communication that we need to discuss. I also direct them to go to our Facebook, to the community page, so that way if they have a picture of an item, they could post it there, and then the hive mind could then all jump on board and say, oh, that's a ring from blah, blah, blah. That person was a past grand. People can kind of collectively give them a little bit of a history of the item, and hopefully gets them interested enough that they want to join. And then there's usually a bunch of people that are like, oh, tagging people who live in the area of that person. And that's a very effective tool I've found, is to just bump them over to the Facebook group and have the collective Odd Fellowship help that person find where they need to go.
And what about some of the inquiries that come through, say, from Instagram? What is it like doing Oddfellows communications on Instagram?
Instagram is a little different from the Facebook and from the website. It's a different crowd. A lot of the inquiries definitely seem to be people that are in like the 30s to 40s kind of age group. Some people in their 20s, but I feel like most of them are like Gen Xers. And a lot of them are people that are into spooky stuff, abandoned buildings, oddities, collecting the Oddfellow antiques. And I go through all those hashtags. I go through IOOF and Oddfellows hashtags every day. And if I see an item for sale, I say like, oh, cool collar, ask me, I may know. To try to, so anybody that reads those comments will see that ask me, I may know, and then they'll bump on back over to the Oddfellows and ask me, what do you know? And it's kind of like a little bit of a call to action that I use on Instagram, and it's effective, and it's a call to action that we've had for a very long time, and I'm a fan of it. And so I just started using it again, and it works. If you just put out there, ask me, I may know, and they're gonna be like, what do you know?
Yeah.
So.
And what kind of successes have you had with your particular area of Oddfellows communication? Either emails coming from the website or inquiries through Instagram or anything like that?
I feel like I can't put a number on how many successful joins have come from people that I have interacted with as that first point of contact. But I do know for a fact, just from you, Toby, I know that I've handed off several people to you that have ended up joining. And I feel like we've developed a really good working kind of team by knowing that, like, if there's anybody in that region, I know if I tag you, you know who to get them. You know, like even today, like somebody in Seattle had a little tattoo that was like an Oddfellows banner. And I was like, oh, you're in Seattle. I tagged Ballard Alkey Lodge, and then I tagged you in it. And that's awesome when the lodges have an Instagram or a Facebook page. That's huge, because that gives me something tangible that I could then tag and show that person immediately. Hey, look, this lodge itself exists. Here's a picture of it. Here's the address. Here's their activities and their events they've been doing. Here's all the pictures of like their socials and whatever. And I feel like that is a huge motivator to get people to join. It makes it less intimidating because, you know, a lot of our buildings, you know, you come and it's this kind of old building on a, you know, second floor lodge, and you got to go in the side door, and it's just like, whoa, where am I going here? You know, and it's part of the fun, but for a lot of people that might be a little much as for that first kind of touch of it. But yeah, I think it's just
Although
talking.
I think some of the younger generation is interested in just that.
Yeah.
The little unknown, the little secret stuff.
That's what got me.
Absolutely. I'm seeing a lot of that myself as we're in a pandemic, so nobody's really doing much. But the younger people who have joined in the past year and a half or so that I have talked to, they really appreciate all of the things that for a lot of us might have been labeled as antiquated. They love the floor work. They love the regalia, especially the older regalia, the nice collars with the fringe and the jewels on them. They're not as interested in the chain regalia or the rope regalia. They really like the old-fashioned collars. And just that sort of sense of things that we don't do anymore that are ritualistic, that has an amazing intrinsic appeal that I think certain lodges are really missing out on, because I've visited lodges, and I know you brothers have as well. You go to a lodge, it's mostly members who've been there for 30 or more years. They just want to rush through everything, get the business done as quickly as possible so they can play cards and eat ice cream. Okay, well, that's one way to approach Odd Fellowship, but it is so much more fun. The experience is more special and meaningful when you do the ritual, when you post the colors, when you do all of the floor work, when you have the regalia. I am a sucker for all of the wonderful fraternal regalia and other items like that. I went out on eBay and bought my own past Grand, past Chief Patriarch collar, and I like to wear that on visitations because people look at it and they go, wow, that seems significant. Well, yes, it's significant. You know, I've served my lodges and my encampment as both a past Grand and a past Chief Patriarch. And that is emblematic of that time that I've put in. And it's wonderful to be able to share that in a lodge situation. So I agree with that. You know, there's a lot of appeal for that kind of esoteric, quirky, fraternal stuff that we have such a rich heritage in. And that really appeals to a lot of the younger members.
If you, I don't know if either of you have watched the show Lodge 49. They canceled it too, which stinks. But there's two seasons. No. There's 2 seasons of it, and it is so charming. And it's kind of a portmanteau of all fraternalism. It's not any one group, but it's all of them together as a fictional group. And you could tell that they've pulled stories from the Oddfellows, because there's like a whole storyline about finding like a mummified body hidden behind a wall, which I think we've all seen the articles about that of Oddfellows Lodge getting renovated, and they find a skeleton and the police get called. And so but that show really captures a lot of the whimsy. I don't want to call it like what do I want to call it? Like the opulence that it can have, but it's like the nonsensical opulence just for its own sake. And it's fun. It's just you put this on because it's fun and you're becoming this role. It's like a costume in a way, like a better version of yourself.
And really what it boils down to is that, and it took me a little while to figure this out, but when you're conferring those degrees, you really become an actor. And, you know, the better you think about acting it, the better it gets. And like we have one member in one of our lodges, and he actually was a part-time actor. When somebody asked him to do King Saul, he decided to study Saul, and he basically found that Saul was a madman.
Yeah.
So when he took on the role, he comes stomping into the room, and then he stomps up the stairs to the dais, and he's walking around like a madman, and he's really just hammering it up like you wouldn't believe. That's fantastic just to watch it. You know, a guy who really knows how to act and present it well.
Yeah, I was very fortunate having joined in Seattle. My home lodge, Ballard Alki 170, has always had a number of very creative people in the lodge. And we had at one time our own degree lodge, Seattle Degree Lodge #1, and we specialized in doing full dramatic presentations of all the degrees. Unfortunately, the brother who organized all of that, who some of you out there who love really weird and esoteric things and are students of occultism will have heard of John Michael Greer. He was a member of Ballard Alki. He organized a lot of that stuff, and he did a fantastic King Saul. Oh, he would come in there and just act everything out. And that is what makes the degree work fun. It's not only fun, it creates the impression we want for the candidate, because the candidate sees the degree work and goes, wow, this is something really significant. It really sticks with them. One thing that is really sad, although I understand it has to happen sometimes, we want to get our members to be fully functioning members of the lodge. So we want them to get initiated, get their 3 degrees. So sometimes we will rush through the degrees. We'll do initiatory and first degree one night, and then 2 weeks later we'll do second and third degree. Well, when you do that, you don't really get the full extent of what each degree is saying. You know, even worse is when we have to do the video initiation or the video degrees, because you don't really get the sense of what's going on. It's when you see that really dramatic presentation and all of the dramatic elements, because the first degree is excellent for those dramatic elements, and so is the second degree. You know, the whole transformation process that happens during the second degree. And of course, we're not going to disclose any of the secrets of Odd Fellowship on this podcast, but that whole experience, when you see it acted out and it's really vibrant and really comes alive, that's what makes the impression on the candidates who are taking the degrees.
Oh, absolutely. And, you know, they're all parables of the Bible. There's nothing secret over there. And I've been lucky over the years in the district that I'm at. We had 4 lodges, and each lodge would specialize in one of those degrees and be really good at it, right? And over the years, as you said, the king, I have seen about 4 different kings who were all different and all very good at the same role, right? And then, you know, when you're talking about the Good Samaritan and et cetera, and I've seen some very good people acting that out. And you're right, it's absolutely better. For example, unfortunately, I'm in with a young lodge, which is actually an old lodge. It dates back to 1874. They were down to about 10 people. And now they've got 34 members, and they're all interested, but I'm having to use part of the video degrees, but I use as little of it as I can, and I do as much. I'm doing most of it. However, we're slowly starting to get these new people. They want to start learning it and doing it. And hey, I'll train them all I can, because the more they do, the less I need to do.
Yeah, that's right. And that also speaks to our institutional legacy. One problem that I foresaw and then got to experience during my term as Grand Master of Washington, information did not always get passed on. Older members who had experience would not trust younger members enough to let them do things. And so then the younger members did not get experience, didn't know what they were doing, and didn't necessarily feel like the time they were spending in the order was valuable as a result. And that is very smart of you to make sure that you're getting those younger members involved, because that is what propagates the information, and it's what keeps the lodge alive for the next several generations.
You know, we're talking about communications here, right?
Yeah.
And so I just like to go back to the year I was Grand Master. So in my message, first of all, I don't believe in long-winded messages.
Yeah.
So I kept mine to 15 minutes. I figure after 15 minutes, you lose people.
Yeah.
What I found interesting is I had 3 pieces in my message that I would give. And one bit of it was membership. One bit of it was visiting. And one bit of it was about the truth. I would give my message, and then afterwards you talk to people. Now what I found is, in me communicating to them, they would remember that part of the message that spoke to them. Whether it was you're talking about the truth, whether it was how to retain members, or whether it was how to visit people. I never ran into anyone that said, hey, I liked all 3 items. They all picked the one that they really seemed to speak to them. So then that's the other important part about communicating, is that whatever you think you say isn't understood the same way by those who listen. And those who should be hearing don't.
Oh, yes. You run into a lot of that as we go through Odd Fellowship. That is definitely true. So what would you say are some of the communication successes?
Well, what I have seen so far, there's a number of things. One of the things is that we definitely seem to be reaching the younger generation. And the younger generation seems to absolutely be interested. They have gone past the novelty of all these new communication systems. That's now blasé. They're looking for something a little more. The secondary part is what we have found is that we're reaching out worldwide. And when I'm saying worldwide is we have a number of people from Europe who are already Odd Fellows. And we're getting a lot of interest from Africa and people in Africa. And in fact, we actually now have a couple of independent Order of Odd Fellows, mostly our Grand United Order of Odd Fellow people, but they all seem to be interested, and all for different reasons. The other thing is when you're looking at their bios, you think, okay, Africa is this underdeveloped area, but a lot of these people seem to be well studied. And they're not just a bunch of people that are living somewhere in the woods. They seem to be very smart and well studied.
A lot of them seem to be from Accra, Ghana, and that is a very, very cosmopolitan city. That region of Ghana is very modern and it's very cosmopolitan. And actually, there's a lot of people that are expatriates moving to Accra so they could get in while the costs are still low enough to basically be entrepreneurs and have their tech companies. And so that region is actually a very, we think of, third world countries and starvation and poverty. And while I'm sure there's still that there, they are also a very up and coming location. And a lot of the interest is coming from there. And it's easy to see like, oh, is this going to be like one of those like Nigerians Prince scammers or something? And we do get a lot of those Illuminati scammy things and we just delete them. But you can tell pretty quickly if it's somebody who's being genuine and they really are interested in Odd Fellowship, or if they're kind of using that copy paste wording that sounds like it's going to lead to like a scam kind of thing. And I've been talking to a gentleman in Pakistan who is a health professional, and he wants to start a lodge in Pakistan with a bunch of his doctor friends. And I'm trying to get him, hooked up, get Terry to get back with him to see how to do that. And then, somebody from probably like Norway or Sweden, but they're in like Malaysia. He wants to start an Odd Fellows Lodge. So my cat just pulled out my ear thing.
Well, also.
So yeah, there's a lot of interest worldwide popping up now, which is really fascinating that like in these countries where there is no Odd Fellowship, they're willing to start a lodge. We just less than a year ago, the first lodge in Brazil came online, and that started with an email through the website. So I would say that was a success. Brazil #1 is a success that I can directly say that, like, yes, that started as an email to the website, and now there's a lodge in Brazil.
And of course, we had a past sovereign Grand Master, Heng Dupre, who took the bull by the horns on that one, and it absolutely is a success story. Before it actually became a lodge, we were starting to get quite a few requests out of Brazil as well as was dealing with a gentleman who had moved to Brazil from Cuba, who was a Cuban Odd Fellow, and he was looking. And so, yeah, definite success stories there.
Yeah, so we are reaching people, which is amazing, and it's very gratifying to see that the systems that we have built are working. And there's always improvements to be made, and we're always talking about what we can build and make improvements on. But
one of the success stories, I would say, is, and a result of this Facebook stuff, is that at our last sessions of Sovereign in 2019, we had a member of the Grand United Order of Odd Fellows speak to us. And I believe it's because all of these web communications we've had that we have become closer and started to understand one another a little bit more. And so now we're reaching out farther. And it's the same Cubans. We're getting a fair amount of interest from the Cubans. Unfortunately, I don't speak Spanish, so I have to go to Google Translate. But that is working. But we had someone who was a Cuban Odd Fellow who's now in Florida who spoke to us as well. So I think a lot of that is the success from our reaching out worldwide communications through all these different venues.
I'll tell you a quick story about our Cuban Odd Fellows. I was at Sovereign last year in Winston-Salem, and our plane was delayed because we had a flight to Charlotte and then from Charlotte back to Seattle. Plane was delayed by thunderstorms, and the grand representative from Cuba happened to be waiting for the same flight because he was flying back to Miami. And he speaks a handful of English, and I fortunately had past Grand Patriarch Greg Powers with me, who's a fellow musician and plays in a Mexican band, and he's picked up a certain amount of Spanish from playing in a Mexican band. And so Brother Danilo and Brother Greg and I were all stuck there at the airport, and between Google Translate on our phones and the little teeny bit of each other's language that we spoke, we were able to learn quite a bit about each other. And I ended up organizing a relief drive in November of last year to collect surplus Oddfellow supplies here in my jurisdiction of Washington, package them up, and then send them to Florida so that Brother Danilo could then take them to Cuba and distribute them. And the Cuban Oddfellows were so incredibly grateful, because what to us would be a ratty old collar is probably the best collar they've seen since the 1950s. So they were incredibly, incredibly grateful and just overjoyed that we could send them all of these wonderful fraternal items that they have a really hard time getting in Cuba.
And
Yeah,
I think it's a testament to the Cubans they basically their lodges were offline from us since the embargo practically, and they kept it going. And then once, communications were able to open up with Cuba, like all these Cubans and these lodges started hitting Facebook and even continue to this day. And it's just like, wow, like there's a lot of Oddfellows in Cuba.
There are. According to what Brother Danilo told me, over 11,000 Oddfellows in Cuba in 110 lodges.
Wow.
And they have Rebecca lodges, and they have encampments there.
So the interesting thing there is that the Cubans have all these Oddfellow lodges, but I'm now assuming that they've sort of just have been operating completely under their own since the embargo. Is that right?
Well, that's a question I can't answer because I don't know how much communication they have been able to have with Sovereign Grand Lodge through the years. The one thing that I did find out, because we didn't really get into any of the overall political aspects of this, during the Revolution, because of the focus of Odd Fellowship being mutual aid and assistance, that was very much appreciated by the Cuban revolutionaries, including Fidel Castro. So the Odd Fellowship has always been regarded very highly in Cuba and by the Cuban government. So they didn't have the kind of stigma of being decadent, bourgeois, sort of those anti-communist type of characteristics.
I also heard a rumor, I don't know if it's true, that Fidel Castro's mother was a Rebecca.
Oh, I've never heard that before.
That is an unverified rumor, but it is something somebody told me. I can't say off the top of my head who it even was.
One of the things that I discovered is when I was in Cuba, a fellow I was hanging out with, he was a Mason. And so he was in contact with the fellow who was a Cuban Mason. And so he was going to try and get to one of their Masonic meetings. The difficulty that he ran into is that he couldn't use the Cuban transportation system for Cubans to go to where the meeting was. And of course, these people had very little money, and it was difficult for them to come and get him. And so he was trying to set up a meeting and maybe get a taxi to take him there. But in the week that we were there, he actually, or the week and a half, whatever it was, he wasn't able to facilitate going to one of their meetings, but I know he would have loved to have gone. So the Masonic have been active there as well, obviously, because that's what I found out when I was there.
Excellent. Well, I think this is a good place to take a break, and we'll listen to a message from our sponsor. And when we get back, we'll talk about some of the less successful aspects of communication in Odd Fellowship. Hello, friends. Toby Hansen here. Do you like soap? I like soap. In fact, I use soap several times a day. I'm here to tell you about a wonderful company that makes soap. Pig and a Pug bath stuff. They started a few years ago in the mountain town of Dahlonega, Georgia, by a crazy-haired lady who was always covered in animal hair. After relocating to Missoula, Montana, and expanding exponentially, it has become a two-person team. They specialize in hot processed soaps and bath bombs, but also sell boatloads of candles, melt and pour soaps, and sugar scrubs. No order is too big, and wholesale orders are definitely welcome. Pig and Pug Bath Stuff. Find them on Facebook and on Etsy, and spend that stimulus check with them. And as a special favor to listeners to the Three Links podcast, they are offering a 24% discount on their Etsy store. Just use the code THANKYOU24 at checkout. That's thank you and the number 24. Pig and Pug Bath Stuff. Excellent soaps for washing up. And we're back here on the Three Links Oddcast. I'm Toby Hansen. We got Ainsley Heilich. Sergio's unable to join us because he is busy at work this evening. Unfortunately, they had a crisis come up, and being the good, reliable odd fellow that he is, he's helping out there at work. We're joined by special guest Wayne Gertz of Ontario, and we're talking about communication this issue, or rather this episode. And we were talking before the break about some of the successes of communication in Odd Fellowship. Now, some of the less successful parts of communication. And Ainsley, I know you've got a few things to say about this as well.
So I'm going to lead in with the question for Wayne. I'm going to, we'll discuss some of the challenges of communications within the order. Individual levels, lodge level, Grand Lodge to sovereign, all the way across the board. I know it's a pretty broad topic, but I think hopefully we can come up with a couple solutions that can make it easy for everybody to get in touch with everybody. So I'll start off with one of my main issues with communications, at least in my job of putting people in touch with people. So a lot of what I do is I find, if somebody's looking for a lodge or if they're looking to join, I try to either locate a lodge for them. And if I'm unable to do that, then I direct them to their grand secretary of the jurisdiction. I hate to say it, but there's a lot of grand secretaries out there that do not check their voicemail or their email.
What? No.
Right. And so the problem with that is then several weeks later, I get a second email from the individuals who had first messaged saying, hey, I never heard back from anybody. What do I do? They must not be interested. And so I have to do a little bit of crow eating at that point and apologize. And of course, right now we have an excuse of the COVID shutting things down. But that's still, that's not, email still works. There's many jurisdictions, none which will be named here, that are notorious for not communicating. And I have to then go to the secondary outlet, which is to direct them to the community page on Facebook to allow the hive mind to then come to the rescue of this candidate before we lose them forever. And then all they know is that they tried to join this organization and nobody got back to them. So that is my main issue right now with communications, is trying to get people to just look at their communication on a consistent basis to check for communications. And then after they look at them, to actually give a helpful response. So that's my big issue. I'm sure Wayne has a lot to say on the topic, so I'll let him pick up here.
Yeah, absolutely. What happens is we'll get an answer back and they'll turn around and they'll say, well, I contacted these people and I've heard nothing. So luckily for some of these items, because I've had access to the member database for quite a while and I'm reasonably efficient in it, I have been able to find individual lodges in an area and give people some contacts. But of course, it involves a little bit of work because, first of all, I have to find out where are they. And then once I find out where they are, then I have to find a map. And I have to go and take a look and see, okay, there's lodges here, here, and here in relation to where he is. The problem I have, the negative part of that is I don't know how good those lodges are, how good their people will respond. And so usually I try to give them maybe 2 or 3 phone numbers and whatever. I just give the name and the phone number. if I have an email, I might give them an email, because even an idiot might send an email, but can't do no harm, or they can call someone, and via telephone, they're not really going to do any harm. But the negative part of it is, I don't know how good these people are. Technically, the Sovereign Grand Lodge tells us, you've got the Grand Secretary's name, get them to get in touch with the Grand Secretary, because the Grand Secretary knows their jurisdiction, and he knows the good lodges and the bad lodges. And he has an absolute point, except when you get these Grand Lodges like Ainsley referred to, who don't respond. So now you're stuck. And so that's absolutely the negative part, is we have to do a lot of slugging because there isn't an overall platform. And as Ainsley found out the other day, is he told someone, oh, well, there should be a lodge over in this area. And so then the response is, no, it's not there anymore. And unfortunately, the database is not necessarily up to date. And why is it not up to date? Because nobody bothered to tell Terry that a lodge closed. So it's not Terry's fault. So those are the bad parts, is where the communication back up the chain does not happen and should be happening. And in my opinion, I would say at least 1/3 of those grand bodies are very poor communicators back up the chain of command. And that's what makes it difficult for us, because we hate to see somebody turn around and say, well, I tried to get a hold of people, nobody gets back to us, and they give up. And for example, today, I put this article out really to invoke a bunch of thoughts. The article basically says how to kill a lodge. And there was a couple responded, and they said, hey, I was already voted on, but I haven't heard anything since. And they've been sitting waiting. So for now, as Ainsley said, we're using the COVID as a convenient excuse, because it appears somebody was voted on and approved a year ago, right? So the time is too long to be getting back to a potential member. And that's all the negative parts, the bad parts that we're finding and cannot do anything about, is the irresponsiveness of a bunch of areas.
Yeah. Now, one thing that I've seen that goes along with that, there are Grand Secretaries that I've known who basically are content to oversee the operation as it goes along without any kind of external interfacing with anything, without looking outside of the organization. Basically, they're content to oversee lodges as they slowly decline, as the membership ages and doesn't add any new people. And they're just happy to kind of let things slowly wind down. When you have that kind of acceptance of an end game like that, I don't know that it's exactly the right way to express it, but when you have that idea of, oh, well, it's just all sort of winding down anyway, I'll sit here and wait until it's all done and then turn out the lights. When you have someone who comes along and says, hey, this sounds great, I want to join, all of a sudden that person who wants to join becomes a problem. It's no longer viewed as an opportunity, it's viewed as a problem. So you've got some young professional woman working in a city and she says, hey, I want to do something in my community after I'm done with work. What can I do? Hey, here's the Oddfellows. I've found the website. And so she emails Ainsley. Ainsley emails back and says, contact this Grand Secretary. And then the Grand Secretary's like, why is this person bothering me? No. That's the wrong attitude for that Grand Secretary to have. But unfortunately, as a lot of Grand Secretaries who've been at the job for a long time and have had to manage the decline of Odd Fellowship, they have got into this attitude where instead of being excited about new members who want to make something really great, and reinvigorate lodges, they become a hassle. It's like, why do I have to deal with this? Can't you just go home? Leave us alone. We're busy going dark here. That's the totally wrong attitude to have.
And you're completely correct, Toby, as far as that is concerned. Unfortunately, it's true. Luckily, the one lodge I belong to, we have one of those young professional women. And one of the things she's done for us is she went through all the archives and she's put a book together of all the early members from 1874 until 2005. And like, she's completely into it and all the old stuff. So, but you're correct. A lot of these people are settled in their ways and they look at the new people as a problem, as an issue. And I'm not sure. All we can do is just keep on plugging away, and hopefully someone will come in at some point, and hopefully they'll change.
Yeah, and I think at some point it would be good to get Brother Scott Moy from Arkansas on here, because I know he's had a lot of experience trying to get something done and not always getting the support that he has necessarily needed to be successful. That's kind of an extreme case, but I am super, super fortunate for a couple of reasons. First of all, my jurisdiction, Washington, we have an amazing Grand Secretary. She works very hard. She's willing to go to any part of the state of Washington to help any lodge out with anything that's needed, and that's past Grandmaster Laurel Deloney. She is fantastic. She is energetic about it, and she is very effusive about her love of Odd Fellowship. On top of that, she is also incredibly good at networking. So we've mentioned some of the process of rebuilding a lodge is you got to get some new members, but you also need some experienced members. So in our jurisdiction, we had Prosperity Lodge number 301 in Wenatchee, Washington. And it's the one we mentioned a couple episodes ago where the young man went to punk shows at the lodge hall as a teenager, got married and had a kid, and then wanted to do some lodge activities when he was in his 30s, and he wanted to go back and join the Odd Fellows. Well, it just so happened that one of Sister Laurel's friends, who was a member of her home lodge in Olympia, had moved to Wenatchee. So she called up her friend and said, hey, I know you want to keep your membership in Olympia, but you're living in Wenatchee now. Would you be willing to go take an associate membership in Wenatchee and help them out? Because they have a lot of new members, but they need some of that experience that comes from having been an Odd Fellow for a while. So that kind of networking and that kind of willingness to go out and build Odd Fellowship is a huge asset in a Grand Secretary. And we're just so lucky here in Washington to have Laurel, who is willing to step up and do that job.
That is very fortunate. And I definitely feel that me being in Illinois, we have a very, very involved Grand Lodge and all the past Grand Masters and everybody. And whenever I got my lodge, Tuscola, going 5 years ago, we were assigned a past Grand Master to be our kind of like our mentor for the first year. And then he brought another past Grand Master along with him. And here we are 5 years later. I mean, obviously we haven't been meeting in person for a bit because of Corona, but here we are 5 years later. And at least for Dan, I've been told by several people, it's reinvigorated his love for Odd Fellowship because he gets to see a functioning, positive, growing lodge the way it should be, instead of it just being you go to your meeting and it's the same 5 quorum and you got to bang out a Rebecca meeting and a Canton meeting and an encampment meeting all in the same night because it's the same 5 people, So for the older members, it could actually be reinvigorating to them to be around the younger members who are excited about it, because excitement just spreads. It's contagious.
It does. And that is another great thing. For the longtime senior members, there's a tendency for us younger, newer Odd Fellows to say, well, they didn't want to let us do anything. They kind of shut down every idea we brought. That's not universally the case. There are a lot of senior members, especially here in my jurisdiction, where they say, great, you've got an idea, come in and let's see if we can make it successful. That's one of the things that has helped revitalize some of our lodges here in Washington, is that there have been those older members who say, great, you want to come in and learn? I will teach you. I will make sure that Odd Fellowship continues in this lodge.
And that is true. And it's absolutely the only way to go. And one of the things I've always gone by, and it doesn't matter whether it's in Odd Fellows or whether it's been in my trade, it's I share anything I can with everybody so that there's more people able to do things. And there's more people able to do things, it makes it a little easier on me. And I can just step back a little bit. Same thing in my job. If I teach someone else to do what I'm doing, then I don't always have to do it. And there are, as you said, Toby, absolutely some good areas where that actually happens. So,
and that kind of also flows into like why when I built the new website, I was like, let's use WordPress because it's super easy for everybody. If you could type an email, you could use WordPress, because I didn't want to be the only person holding the keys to the castle. I wanted it to be a group thing, you know, so it wasn't just dependent on me. I wanted it to be something like, if I said to heck with this and I quit, people could still maintain it and have that, that ability. And I think there's too many lodges and grand lodges that have just been operating on that one person with the keys to the castle, and they don't either remember how to mentor people, or they just are too tired, or whatever it is, or they feel too possessive of it.
Yeah, I can sort of add a little bit to that. It's like Ainsley does most of the work on it. I have access, and I've done a tiny little bit here and there. And the only reason that I knew a little bit about WordPress, because in Ontario, we have a super web guy, and we went to WordPress about 2 years ago, I think it was. Anyways, might be 3 years ago, but he has been putting every lodge on there and on WordPress. And there was a couple of websites I had as part of the Grand Lodge website. For example, I had my own home lodge, and as part of it, I had the Rebecca Lodge in there, and I had my encampment in there. And then when he moved it over to WordPress, he only moved the lodge over, so now I'm going to have to redo it. But along the way, he's given every lodge an email address on the Grand Lodge website, and he has put a very base website for each lodge on there, as well as a calendar. But he's really good at it. But the rest of the order, most places, still not quite that good at it. So most of the stuff, even though it's there, is sitting there. Hopefully soon enough, we're going to have some other people interested in communicating that way via the website. But meanwhile, even though he's done that terrific work on the website, I see a number of our lodges in Ontario have a Facebook page, because it's even easier. And they're using that, even though we have this Cadillac website that is there for them. Facebook is easier.
Well, and I think it's important to keep in mind that Facebook and a website do slightly different things. A website is important because that is, for our older listeners, it is the analogy of the phone book. The place you could always go to get basic information on how to get a hold of someone or something used to be the phone book. You know, we all had those big, thick phone books sitting under the rotary dial phone we used to have. Well, now that has become the website. People go to the search engine of their choice, and they search for whatever they want to find out about. And so every entity needs a website that is separate from Facebook just to be that reference material. In the music business, we used to refer to the website as being your front window display. It was the thing that people saw when they walked past your shop. So that's what every lodge, every Grand Lodge, and the Sovereign Grand Lodge needs, a window display so that people on the web can see that and go, oh, Friendship Lodge number 20, or Philomath Lodge number 35, or whatever lodge it is, and they can see the Grand Lodge information, which encompasses where to go to find any lodge in the state or province, and then the Sovereign Grand Lodge. Well, Facebook is something a little different, because that's really more of a real-time interactive thing. That's where you can post information about activities that are going on. You can promote things. You can send out messages quickly to the group. Hey, there's been a gas leak downtown. The lodge hall is closed. We won't be meeting tonight. Things like that. So they're really kind of different things. It is helpful, like you said, Ainsley, to have a Facebook page so that when someone is first interested, you're not just sending them an email and saying, yes, this lodge exists. You're sending them to a Facebook page that says, not only does this lodge exist, you can see examples of the activity that the lodge does. So you can see the picnic on Saturday. You can see the raffle that they've got going on. You can see the night when they're having homecoming where they make oyster stew, and all the members who don't get to come to meetings that often, you know, their grandkids or great-grandkids will bring them down to the hall for oyster stew. So having a Facebook page for the lodge tells the world that the lodge is active and doing things, and this is something that you want to be part of because it's so much fun. Look at all this fun stuff we're doing.
And I think that kind of pivots into maybe, I feel like this is like secret of the communications committee, is that the Sovereign Grand Lodge pays for like a GoDaddy, like a URL for every Grand Lodge. Every single Grand Lodge already has its own URL if they don't want to use the one that they've already purchased, like what you guys have in Washington or what we have in Illinois, for example, because people, they just don't realize it's available. Most of those states or those jurisdictions, they don't have a website at all, and they've already got that purchased. There's really no reason why they haven't set up a website other than their own just lack of vision or motivation.
Actually, there might be a slight correction to that.
Okay.
I talked to Steve Wooten one time, and they do have a number of those Grand Lodges, but not all of them. They're not paying for all of them. They don't have all of them. For example, there was one where I started picking off some of these different Grand Lodges who had let some of their websites lapse. And for example, Florida, I got a hold of them. I think it was FLIOOF, and so it had lapsed. Luckily, no one had picked it up, so they were able to get it back. Somebody just forgot to pay the dues. West Virginia, where some scam outfit took over that website, and there was all kinds of crap going on. And so I kind of had to get a hold of West Virginia and find out. And yeah, unfortunately, the West Virginian website, it was taken over by some shady outfit.
They must go and pick up all the like the expiring domains and put something really embarrassing on it. So then you have to pay like an inordinate amount of money of ransom to get the whatever inappropriate stuff off the domain name that you've had for the last 20 years.
Yeah, Montana used to have a very nice website, but recently, as a result of revenue downturns in that jurisdiction, they decided to discontinue their website, which is a real tragedy because, as we know, there's some activity starting to get going in Montana, in Helena, because the guy who bought the old Oddfellows home outside of Helena, Montana, he was doing some research and said, hey, this sounds really great. I would like to join. Ainsley, you and I got him in touch with Brother Kalen Wasser, who's a member of Rainbow 28 in Great Falls, and he put together a group of past Grand Masters in Montana to help work with this guy and reestablish Montana Lodge number 1 in Helena. So hopefully soon the Grand Lodge of Montana will have some more dues coming in, and they'll be able to get their website up and going again, because Odd Fellowship, it really is growing. People really are out there looking for it. We, as members, especially those of us who are in an oversight capacity, handling the information, we have to make sure that we are really responsive when those requests come in. We got to be ready to jump on it and say, yes, thank you for contacting us. Here's the email address or the phone number of a lodge in your town where you can contact people and get started in Odd Fellowship. Because it really, really is happening. There really are people who want to join. And we got to make sure they can join.
And it kills me anytime I see somebody saying, oh, young people don't want to join the Odd Fellows. Or anybody that's like, Odd Fellowship is dead. Nobody wants to join. It's not... It kills me because it just takes a big crap on all the work that we're all doing together out of our own sense of duty, because we're like, somebody needs to do this stuff. So might as well be us, because nobody else is standing up to do it. And it's just such, like, not that like I'm personally offended, but I mean, it just really lets me know how much work we have left to do, that like I feel like we've made these leaps and bounds, but obviously people still think nobody wants to join, or we're a dead organization, or we're hard to get a hold of. And so I guess it just shows that like we've just chipped away, because like, I mean, really, the Oddfellows didn't really do much promotions probably since the 40s, if we're perfectly honest. So we've got a lot of catching up to do. And so, but
it would be nice though if we could have, like you said, in Montana or whichever state it was, but it's not that expensive just to at least maintain and keep the URL, as far as, you know, pay your $10 a year or whatever, even if you can't afford to host it, so that it's down there down the road. But how do you get the message across to those Grand Lodges who are in a money pickle and are looking not to spend money, right? How can you get them to think toward the future and say, well, maybe we might grow? It's, again, the negative part of those who don't see an increase coming down, so why maintain it? It's unfortunate.
It is unfortunate. You know, it's the whole issue of not realizing when it's most critical to invest in the future, because to so many people that I have met and talked to, they say, why are we throwing money away on this computer thing? We don't have people coming into the lodges. Well, did your lodge ever have a listing in the phone book? Why were you throwing money away listing your lodge in the phone book? You know, it's because for people to find you, for people to join, they need to know how to access the lodge. And it's the same thing. We got to make sure that people who are interested can find us, because Ainsley, you've seen it. Wayne, you've seen it. I personally have seen it. There are a lot of people who are looking for something, especially right now, that gives them a sense of belonging, that gives them the idea that they're connected to their community. And we have that. I think Odd Fellowship is one of the best ways for people to feel like they belong to something meaningful. And then it's so disappointing when you get someone who is a grand secretary or a lodge secretary who is not responsive to that when they do finally get that membership inquiry. You know, because we say we want members, but are we willing to do the work when we get an inquiry? Are we willing to see it through all the way until that person is initiated?
Right. And then conversely, once they're initiated, we can't just drop them and not keep up with them and keep mentoring them. Like, just because you got that check for the dues from them, that doesn't mean your job is done at all. You need to involve them in the lodge and start telling them how things are done, and keep that communication open and keep them involved, because otherwise they're going to be like, well, this sucks, you know. And we have to make sure what we're selling is actually what we are. You know, we can't be misadvertising that, you know, we give you this philosophy system and you're going to learn all these great skills that are going to make you a better person, and you're going to learn how to run a nonprofit, and you're going to learn all these great things. And then you go to a lodge and they're just sitting around a kitchen table fighting. That's not what we're about. And unfortunately, I feel like that's also an experience that a lot of people do get when they might get a good front end message either from me or Wayne or whoever, or from Toby. And then once they get into the lodge itself is not on the same page at all. And it's just like, what did we send these people into, you know?
Yeah.
And that's also, I mean, that's a topic for a whole other discussion.
And of course, that proves the point that Terry Barrett made to us is the Grand Secretaries are supposed to know the good lodges so you don't send them into a bad lodge. Unfortunately, the intent is all there for it to be good. Unfortunately, not all Grand Lodges are that good.
Well, this has been a great discussion. Anybody have anything else they want to add on the communication theme?
Oh, yeah. I wanted to bring up the lodge directory, lodge map thing.
Oh, yes.
Has been the hot topic of the week. It comes up every so often. And one thing that people are like, why isn't there a lodge directory? Because the thing that confuses people, I feel like the most, is that they go, the number 2 page visited on the Sovereign Grand Lodge website is find a lodge near me. And then it goes to a landing page that just says, we don't have a full public directory. These are the Grand Lodges you can contact. And then you go to the next page, which then goes to the other side of the website, which then has the Grand Lodge directories on it. And people don't understand those terms. And they think that there's like, they only see 4 listings for like a RA, GE, GL, whatever. And they don't understand what that means. And they think that just means there's just like 3 or 4 lodges in that entire jurisdiction. And not that they got to click on that email and then go further. And even though I've written it on the website very clearly, people don't read. And people are like, well, why isn't there a directory or a map that you could click on? Like a lot of jurisdictions have a Google map that's got all the little pins and such. And I think all the stuff we've already covered is giving a little insight as to why we don't have that resource available yet, even though that is something that I have pulled everybody's ear on in committee at Sovereign about, because it is something I do want to do. And I do think it'll be a fantastic resource, but we're just not in a moment where it's a feasible thing to be accurate and useful in the way that it should be.
Yeah, it takes gathering a huge amount of information and then keeping that information current. And in an ideal world, with every lodge meeting every single week, you can send letters back and forth and reports get filled out correctly the first time, and everything happens and all of that gets compiled in a timely manner by Grand Secretaries who forward it on to Terry Barrett, who then quickly formats a report with all the information you need. But as we all know, this is a volunteer organization, and volunteers at every level have all sorts of things that come up. You get somebody who's been the Grand Secretary of a small state for the past 38 years, and they break their hip and they're in the hospital, and their kids and grandkids are cleaning up their home office, and they're like, what's all this stuff? And they don't know it's important. There are so many links in the chain that it takes to get information up and down in this organization that one broken link somewhere, all of a sudden we've got a mess on our hands, and we're having to spend a lot of time digging it out and making sense of it. So,
and if that link dies,
yes,
that is a horrible situation that puts a lot of jurisdictions in grave peril.
Yes,
that they're teetering on the edge with that one Grand Secretary with the broken hip that's been holding it together as with duct tape and glue for the last 30 years. And the only person that knows where in the office to find the report on how to do this, and then they die and nobody knows how to do any of it.
Yeah, absolutely. That's when we concentrate knowledge in only one place, we really create a potential catastrophe for ourselves.
Which is why nobody should have the keys to the castle.
That's a topic for another episode.
No, just one person, I mean, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, somebody should have them. Maybe several people, and then
several people should have keys to the. I don't mean like no one person should have the keys to the castle.
Yeah, hide a key under a rock out back.
Actually, the truth be known, and I'm just in such a situation really where I'm the Grand Scribe.
Yeah.
And I mean, I have all the stuff on my computer, and I keep it backed up. And so, as far as it goes, it's available, but nobody really knows that I have it. And even though none of it is under any kind of a password, my wife might be able to point it out to them. But if something happened to her and me at the same time, there'd be a lot of information no one would get. And it's really something where I should be thinking of maybe making a backup, giving it to someone else so that should something happen to us, that at least somebody can find a whole bunch of files, and even if they don't quite have the program like WordPerfect that I love to use, at least they're going to be able to have the files and figure it out, right? So yeah, I'm really just as guilty as this guy with the broken hip you're talking about.
Yeah, but I mean, it's so easy to happen, to not have a legacy plan or like that just in case bug out box of this is where all the stuff's located, or like a little book that's got the passwords, or like an email account. Like we have that email account that I call the lockbox that we put all the passwords in. So if anything happens, we can all look into that one email account and be able to find all the important stuff just saved in this email account.
That is really important. You know, part of communication is safeguarding the information. You know, since music has turned to digital production, we have a saying, the data doesn't exist until it exists in two places.
You're absolutely right.
Yeah, because there has to be regular backups. There has to be somebody outside of the regular structure so that when a catastrophe occurs, you can go in and get the information. Because, you know, Lord help us, what happens if Mount Rainier blows up here in Washington and a giant volcanic mud flow covers the town of Buckley? Well, there's our Grand Lodge with all of our records and our storage and everything. I suppose Terry can probably scrounge up a new seal and a copy of last year's annual reports, and we could rebuild it from scratch, but we don't want to have to do that. We have to make sure that our information stands alone so that it's not dependent on any one particular person. Well, is there any more about communication here?
I think I'm pretty much covered.
Good. Well, we will go ahead and wrap up this episode. Now, Brother Wayne, we have a little segment at the end called the Odd Podge, where we each get to share something that's not necessarily Oddfellows related, but just something that we find interesting, kind of like Good of the Order at the end of a lodge meeting. So, Ainsley, why don't you go first, then we'll have Brother Wayne share something.
Oh man, I didn't prepare something.
Come on, you know it's a regular segment.
Okay.
I know. I failed. I'll try to think of something real quick. If you got something to start with.
Yeah, go ahead, Wayne.
How about if I start, and then while I'm talking, you can think about it. So, for example, here is something that Toby might not know, or Ainsley for that matter is, but I used to play a French horn. So
Really?
I can actually read music. I also sang in the choir. Right now, we're not allowed to sing.
Yeah.
So I sing baritone. And my wife is a fantastic singer. She's got a real good natural voice. So I was never allowed to sing. But now that I'm singing in the choir, we're actually singing some duets together.
Oh, wonderful.
And then the other interesting tidbit is I grew up in a family and I had 7 brothers. I have 7 brothers and sisters. And so it was never a dull moment as far as that goes. So I've had a great, happy life between brothers and sisters, blood or otherwise.
Well, that's wonderful. All right, Ainsley, you got something for us now?
I do. I just recently started seeing somebody, and she's a musician as well.
Yeah.
So there you go. And so one of the things we've been really talking about is she can't go do shows right now because obviously. So we've started talking. It's like, well, I got this big room here, you know, and we're kind of putting together pieces to start doing professionally put together live stream concerts from the Lodge Hall. We're still in the chit chat planning phase of it to try to figure out logistics. And I've got a good camera that would work for it, and trying to figure out equipment to plug into so we can mix the camera with the audio and have it all synced up and everything. But yeah, so that's going to be a new opportunity to get more attention to the lodge, is doing these live concerts broadcast from the lodge that'll be professionally put together. It's not just going to be like setting your phone up and hitting the live, you know? So yeah, that's a little fun little project I'm kind of looking forward to getting into a little bit more. So.
Well, there you go. All professional musicians need to join the Oddfellows right now.
Yes.
Because if for no other reason, for many lodges that have their own building, it gives you access to a space. You can
a very big space with amazing acoustics.
You can do live broadcasting, do all sorts of things. One of the many wonderful reasons to be an Oddfellow.
So can I add one more little thing about it? I met the Grand Sire of Europe a number of years ago at Savin, and he was from Norway. So I walked up and said, hey, I have a brother up there. He might be a good candidate to join. Well, I'll make a long story short. He's an Oddfellow in Norway. But we were talking earlier about degrees. Well, it took 2 years before he finally received the third degree up in Norway.
Wow. I've heard that they're very serious about doing degree work in Norway specifically, and that it takes time. You really have to study the degrees and prepare and earn them.
And then once you join the encampment, you earn a ring, right? Is that Norway or is that Sweden?
I don't know.
Yeah.
And then if you quit, you have to give the ring back.
Oh. There you go. There's one way to keep them in their encampment meetings.
Yeah.
So here's another little tidbit. Iceland, they have 7,000 members.
Yeah.
And their annual dues are over $600 US per member.
Wow. Yeah, so no more complaining about $50 a year dues in my jurisdiction, not when the Icelanders are paying $600 a year.
So what the Oddfellows brings to those members really must have a high value.
Yeah.
And they're getting their $600 worth of value out of being a member of that organization. Well, and that's what we need to make sure we're doing here on this side of the pond, is make sure we're bringing even that $50 of value to those members.
Well, here's the other side of the coin, and that's this. If your dues are too cheap, people just pay their dues, but they have no interest in doing anything as a member. So if the dues are $115 a year like mine are, you know what? Maybe I better go to the lodge and get my money for it. And so there is truth to that one, too.
Yeah, there is.
Yeah, that's true.
Well, here's my tidbit for the Odd Podge. This is only our third episode here on the Three Links Oddcast, but already we're generating some interest in the world of fraternal podcasting. So, Ainsley, I believe you've already done an episode of our other Oddfellows podcast, The Modern Goat Rider, out of Victoria, British Columbia.
I don't believe it is out yet, but yes, I did one several weeks ago. So, yeah.
Well, they've asked me to come on and speak about the encampment because, as everybody knows, I am a past Grand Patriarch of Washington. And also, I'm going to be doing a guest spot on the Masonic Light podcast coming up in October. So we're getting a lot of really great fraternal cross-promotion here. And for those of you who've not yet subscribed to Modern Goat Rider, get on that right away, because Billy and John, they do a fantastic podcast for Oddfellows out of Columbia Lodge number 2 in Victoria, British Columbia. So that's it for us here at the Three Links Oddcast. I'm Toby Hansen. We've got Ainsley and our special guest, Brother Wayne from Ontario. Thank you very much, everyone, for listening. Our next episode is going to be about rebuilding a Grand Lodge. We're going to have the Grand Master of New York on with us, and we're going to be talking to him about his experiences as they gave a jump start and a reboot to their Grand Lodge in New York. So thank you very much, everyone, for listening, and we'll catch with you all later.